Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, June 25th, 2022, and yesterday, Friday, June 24th, 2022, the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a landmark decision case that allowed and guaranteed a woman's right to abortion across the United States, now pushing it back to a statewide issue for the first time after nearly 50 years. Roe v. Wade was declared in 1973. It was a Supreme Court decision. While unpopular at the time, it became increasingly more popular across the United States. And as of today, about 2 in 3 Americans support a legal right to abortion in some form or many forms for women across this nation. Now, the Supreme Court, of course, isn't a body that listens to the general public. They are very much unable to take in public opinion, not necessarily because they can't, but rather because the court is set in ways that relies on 9 individual people with very clear intentions and very clear personal beliefs towards a lot of these issues where it really doesn't matter where the American public stands. And with this new overturning of Roe v. Wade, we are now in a position where Roe versus Wade has been put back on the ballot for these midterm elections, to a point where millions of Americans, millions of women across the nation are now going to be voting, potentially speaking, for their right to an abortion in many of these crucial states. And it gets very difficult to see how this isn't turned on specifically lower income women across the United States. I don't think it's a partisan thing to say that this overturning of Roe v. Wade will very much impact low income Americans more than they will impact higher income Americans. I think this overturning of Roe v. Wade is something that has been debated in American politics, and I'm not going to push any type of one direction or another on this issue, but what I will say is that there are going to be people that are angry, and arguably speaking, rightfully so. The Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade now puts it into effect in many states where there are now abortion bans as of yesterday. People that were getting abortions today are having them canceled. People that got them yesterday or could have had them yesterday might now be prosecuted for having them. These abortion bans are now in effect in a multitude of states because some of these states have trigger laws. Trigger laws that I mentioned back when we talked about the Supreme Court leak that showed that the Supreme Court was going to overturn abortion rights. It seems as if the vote and the draft opinion did not change heavily, if at all, until this final proceeding, until this final ruling. And looking at these states with abortion laws, trigger laws are essentially laws that were put into place in the event that the Supreme Court did overturn Roe versus Wade, meaning that the moment that it was overturned, abortion would become entirely illegal in some of these states. Heartbeat bills, or at the first possibility of life. I mean, things of that nature make it so abortion is in effect, totally banned across these states. We have Wisconsin, Alabama, Kentucky, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana. We have states where it might be expected, and we have states that there is a very possibility that it might be coming around when it wasn't expected. For instance, Wisconsin. I don't think many people would have expected a state that goes back and forth between voting for Democrats and Republicans would already have an abortion ban. But that's what happens when you elect a Republican statewide official who believes in the pro-life beliefs, who believes that abortion should be banned. That's typically what you would expect to see, and we could see this happen all across the nation, because this map that shows in effect and expected soon isn't even the end of it. So like I said a few minutes ago, Roe v. Wade is very much back on the ballot. This is something that hasn't really been on the ballot for decades. Roe versus Wade was established in 1973. That was a time frame in which the American public was a lot more conservative than they are today, especially on the issue of abortion. That Supreme Court decision led multiple people to have the ability to relitigate this case, multiple justices, and yet they all came to the same conclusion prior to this one, that Roe versus Wade must be upheld. All of the justices that voted to overturn Roe v. Wade said under oath, in some form or another, that they were not going to go against Roe v. Wade, that they were not going to relitigate it. So there was no real concern, at least, from those who believed the testimony under oath, maybe Republicans, maybe Democrats, who believed in what was being said by the Supreme Court justices or nominees at the time. But now it very much has become an issue, because this isn't speculative. This isn't a draft opinion that protests might be able to change, because protests did happen. There was a very clear pushback against this decision from the courts, and they followed through exactly how they intended. Because like I said previously, they frankly don't care about the amount of Americans that support legal abortion across the United States. And spoiler alert, there's a lot of them. A significant amount of American voters on the national average support a legal right to abortion. You're talking on a low 66%, on a high 71%. I mean, abortion access and abortion rights, sure, when it comes down to full and total accessibility to abortion, the number does drop until around the low 50s, mid 50s. But that's still the majority of the nation. Generally speaking, people support a right to legal abortion, especially in the case of rape, incest, or the mother's life is at risk. And yet some of these states don't even provide an opportunity for that. So voters are very clearly going to be angry. I think this Supreme Court decision, like I said a month and a half ago, is the one thing that I think the GOP is going to regret. Obviously, this was not their individual ruling, but they are responsible for it. And American voters know that. The messaging that has been put on for Democrats and Republicans for the past 50 years since Roe v. Wade is that Republicans are pro-life and Democrats are pro-choice. That has always been how it is. You go back to the 2016 presidential debate when Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were asked their question about Roe v. Wade, about whether or not their Supreme Court nominees and Supreme Court justices would consider overturning Roe v. Wade. Donald Trump says that if he was to get his nominees on the court, that he'd expect Roe v. Wade to be overturned. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, Donald Trump himself knows that this decision is bad for the Republican Party. He said so to his closest allies, which was leaked to the press. And he isn't wrong. I think, on one hand, I don't like to politicize issues such as this one, but it obviously is very much political. And whoever wins these governorships, state legislative races, Senate elections, House elections, will be the people going into power when there could be a consideration about making a nationwide level of abortion bans, abortion restrictions, things of that nature. Should Republicans get control of Congress, they might proceed forward with something that they never had the opportunity to do until now. So it is very much a political issue, and it will be important for these midterm elections because for the first time in forever, abortion access and abortion rights are going to be on the ballot. These are things that voters did not really take much into consideration before. Pro-life versus pro-choice, sure. It was always a debate. It was always going to enrage people. It was always going to build up this tension between parties. But it wasn't the make or break for individual people's candidacies. Being pro-life or pro-choice really didn't matter as long as Roe v. Wade was around, because no matter how pro-life you weren't going to restrict or ban abortion because of the precedent set by Roe v. Wade. That has now been changed. And looking at these states where you can see actually on the New York Times website, where you can see the tracking and the legal status of abortion across these states, we have millions of women now that are unable to get an abortion, and it will stay that way for decades to come until a new Supreme Court decision. And looking at the current composition of the court, that is going to take a very long time. And that is going to anger voters. I mean, Donald Trump said to his closest allies that is going to turn out white suburban women, the same group that elected Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. And he's absolutely right. While banning and restricting abortion might not necessarily enrage some groups as much as others, Donald Trump is right about that. Because of the groups that tend to support abortion access and abortion rights the most, you're talking about minority women and white women, women in general, suburban women especially. Those are groups that you do not want to lose. Those are groups that you can't afford to lose as a Republican, as Donald Trump very much displayed in the 2020 election. Because they backed him in 2016, but didn't in 2020, and that made all the difference. It was the difference between a re-election bid and a loss, and now movement into a new type of phase for a Save America PAC. I mean, suburban women, alongside many, many other organizers and minority voters across this nation, helped provide Joe Biden his victory. All of it was essential there. But it is very clear about who is going to be angered, and it's a good, significant portion of this country. where now, especially in those states where there might be a ban put into effect, it's going to be very difficult to see how that doesn't hurt the Republican Party nationwide. The legal status of abortion without Roe can be tracked in these states. This website can be found on the New York Times. I don't know if it's hidden behind a paywall. I don't see one come up when I go to it. Hopefully it's not, because it's very important information. But you look at some of these states and you say, I thought this was a swing state. Some of these states, like I said, made sense. Not necessarily because you would expect them to restrict abortion, or maybe you would, but more so because of what the politicians in these states have promised. For example, in South Dakota or Missouri or Arkansas, where Republicans have been elected, and have always been saying that they are pro-life. And once given the opportunity, we're going to act on it. But in other states, maybe, they might be a little bit more surprising. For instance, Georgia voted for Biden. Arizona voted for Biden. Might be Florida, Ohio, Texas. Texas might make sense, but keep in mind, it's still very much a swing state. All of the states I mentioned were swing states. Looking over at the uncertain map, that shows that there are voters out here that, depending on a new law or change in party control, there could be a restriction on abortion access. 16 states across the U.S. have already declared that there will never be a restriction against abortion. Some states have even put Roe v. Wade into law, meaning that it can't be overturned without some type of intervention. I mean, looking at some of the states that have done that, those are blue states. But in terms of some of these states that are uncertain, some of them are quite surprising. Virginia voted for Biden by 10.1% in the last election. Yet now, with the Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, and now a Republican-controlled House of Delegates, there's a very real possibility that Virginia does ban abortion. And Glenn Youngkin said this secretly on a hot mic, or actually a secret mic to a journalist that was recording, and yet voters elected him. But they didn't elect him because he was pro-life. They elected him because he was unhappy. They were unhappy with Joe Biden, and they did not expect Roe v. Wade to be overturned. Pennsylvania, Michigan, both Biden states that voted for Obama, Kerry, Gore. These are states that you might not necessarily expect that to happen, but could very well happen as a result of a new governor, as a result of a new state legislature. That's a very real possibility. North Carolina, Iowa. I don't think it would surprise many people that those talks are in the works, but Governor Roy Cooper in North Carolina said that he will oppose it on every level that he can. But what if Republicans get a majority where he can't veto that? Roy Cooper wrote the bill to allow the governor the opportunity to veto things, and he shot himself in the foot when he didn't allow himself to veto a congressional map, but he's going to try to do so now. We will see what happens, though, because he's up for re-election in 2024, and he can't run, actually. He's up because he won re-election in 2020, so Republicans might be able to do it then. In the state of Iowa, we will see what happens, too. The point being that across the nation, there are many opportunities for abortion access to be restricted and limited, to a point where it might become, potentially speaking, 30 states. 9 states have already done it, 12 states are going to likely do it, and 9 states are in the uncertain time frame, in the uncertain phase where it might happen depending on who wins this November. The Democratic Party is going to make this a national issue because it is now a national issue. This has never been something that Democrats needed to campaign on solely. Right now, the issues have been inflation, gas prices, and economic issues. And now we're throwing a whole new big issue, a retalk of healthcare, retalk of abortion access, a women's right to choose, women's rights. I mean, these are things that were not in consideration before, and that Democrats were trying to use because they knew that something like this would be coming. And to be fair, the Democratic Party has had many opportunities to codify Roe v. Wade into law and never took those opportunities, especially under President Obama's first 2 years in office. I mean, it is a very bad look for the Democratic Party to know that at that point in time, they had a supermajority. At that point in time, Obama could have pushed this through Congress, and they didn't. Probably because they didn't think that it would be a mainstream issue, but look at where we're at right now. When you don't take action, people will go against your said inaction and actually push back on what you might think is the status quo, or push back on what you might think is the new norm. What we saw yesterday with Roe versus Wade is that the Supreme Court doesn't care about public opinion, but voters do. Voters who have said public opinions will care. I don't think this will dramatically change the midterms to a point where all of a sudden we're in a blue wave year. I think that's naive to think. But what I do think is that some of these Senate races, some of these governorships, and some of these House races, alongside many other down ballot races that might have been leaning towards the Republican Party, could end up back in the Democratic column. Because that's what happens when you enrage a significant amount of voters, probably 90% of those who are truly enraged by this decision, were already voting Democrat. Or maybe they weren't voting at all and will now vote in the midterms. What the Republican Party has done has pissed off a significant chunk of this nation and restricted a significant chunk of this nation. That restriction doesn't limit their right to vote. It doesn't limit what they do these midterm elections. Voters are going to be angry. Voters already are angry. And while it is a decision that we might have been able to predict, it isn't one that is landing kindly across the United States, because it is very clear where the American public stands on this issue. And as you can see, almost all of the swing states, it's a positive level of approval for legal abortion across their state. The only state that we characterize as a swing state that doesn't support abortion is Texas. You have states such as Florida, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Iowa, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, New Hampshire, Maine. These are all states that are competitive at one point or another that support a legal right to abortion, which means Republicans, should they run on a pro-life stance, should they run on a pro-life ticket in some of these states, it might not have mattered before, but it absolutely does matter now with new considerations and a very real possibility that whoever you elect as governor, senator, representative, state legislator, whatever it might be, could very well restrict your right to an abortion, or anyone you know's right to an abortion across the state. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.